Your trainer for today is Rayen Go. Rayen is our digital media specialist from PixelStudio. He shares video editing duties with Hafiz and also produce many animated videos to promote our NLB services during the circuit breaker period. So you can see at our YouTube page, at our Facebook page, all these animated video to promote our services. That's done by Rayen lah. So with us today, we also have other PixelStudio members, Roger and Hafiz, who will also help to moderate the session. So without further ado, let's start the webinar session, and I hand over the session to Rayen, who will spend roughly around 30 to 40 minutes going through the basics of photography and show you some of the useful examples. It'll be fun. So relax, enjoy, and take it away, Rayen.
Okay, hi everyone. Let me just introduce myself. I'm Rayen from the team. So from the PixelStudio team, I specialize in videography, video editing, and motion graphics animation. I've been in the team for about 2.5 years. The first year was through a temp contract under a recruitment agency, and at the end of it, I was like converted to like the officially recruited under NLB. So prior to this, I worked as a baby and family studio photographer for a few months, where I gained a strong portfolio of photos and experience. Okay, so what I aim to do with today's session is to translate what I know and learn from my studies, work, and personal experience into this bite-sized intro to photography, which you can use not just for your work, but also for your own personal lives as well. Okay, so the topics taught today are all essentials in photography and videography as well. So I hope you learn something new by the end of it. Okay, so let's start with the very basics, which is camera angles. So there are a number of camera angles. Here are some like just common ones which you can use in your day-to-day life. Okay, they are eye level, low angle, high angle, hip level, overhead, and aerial. Okay, so what eye level is basically to position your camera at the eye level of your subject. So it creates a very neutral and natural perspective of your subject. For low angle, basically it's placing the camera below your subject so that the subject actually looks down on your viewer, giving a very superior kind of sense, very strong feeling. So high angle is the opposite of low angle. So when you take a high angle, the person looks smaller, more weak. And basically, if you have a person, say, who is a little bit chubby, and you take from a higher angle, it's actually more flattering. Because if you take from a lower angle, the person will actually look rounder and larger, like you see in this photo here. Okay, so hip level is basically like eye level, just that it's based on the height of the hip. So this is usually used when you are taking a wider shot, and then the angle needs to match the perspective, the lines of the buildings. So overhead is basically a top-down view. So this one is like Mission Impossible. Then you take from on top, and then you see the whole area, the whole environment. And then aerial is like a bird's eye view. So when you use a drone to take videos or photos, it's kind of like this as well. Or if you take a photo from a high-rise building, it's like it's called aerial. Okay. So next is so there are different uses to each of these camera angles, and it's important to know when and how to apply them. If you have a friend or family that says they look fat, right? So yeah, just try taking from a higher angle. Okay. So next is shot sizes. So shot sizes is basically how close or far the camera is from your subject. So we have extreme long shot, very long shot, long shot. So basically this one, we normally term them as wide shot. So when you are far from your subject and you can see their full body, it's wide shot. Then from the knee up, it's medium long shot. From the waist up, it's mid shot. From the chest up, it's medium close up. And then the face, or from the neck up, is close up. Then big close up is the face itself. And then extreme close up is like very tiny details, like very close details, like your eyes, your ear, nose, fingers, things like that. Okay. So all these shot sizes actually evoke different feelings. Like you want to show the environment of your scene, like your scenery, the landscape, is a wide shot. Then if your photo is a portrait of a person, let's say at mid shot to close up, like mid shot to close up, right? It gives the viewer a more intimate feeling towards the subject. So it's usually recommended for, like wedding photography or like a job portrait. Yeah. So and then if, for example, we have a wide shot of a parade, right, it evokes a feeling of grandeur. So this one was taken in 2014 NDP. So you can see the wide shot of the entire stadium and then the fireworks. So it looks very grand. Yeah. Okay, next is composition techniques. Okay, what this is basically how you position your subjects, angle your camera, and frame the photo so that it looks best to the human eye. It's also where you apply what you have learned from the previous two topics on camera angles and shot sizes. It basically combines everything. Okay, so here are some common composition techniques. The first one is rule of thirds. So rule of thirds basically divides the photo into 9 sections. You can see there's 9 boxes, and then you place your subjects on the grid lines. So for what I've done with this photo is you can see the deserts on the lines. So it creates a more pleasing look to the photo, and for the viewers, your eye actually focus and see these things in a more comfortable way. Okay, so next is leading lines. So it's the use of lines to direct attention to a part of the photo. So if you can see this photo here, I've used lines that are on the shelves, the light, the floor, to direct attention to the couple over here. It's commonly used with rule of thirds and symmetry. So you can see some symmetry in this photo as well as this photo. And in this photo, the bridge is the main subject, so it's on the line of the rule of thirds. And then you see all the lines from the buildings is all directing towards the bridge itself. And there's symmetry along the center of the photo. Yeah. Okay. Next is symmetry. Yeah. So symmetry is the use of mirroring patterns to create interest. So you can see in this photo here, I've used like it's basically centering. So you have the top down very similar and the left and the right side very similar. So there's symmetry on all sides. And it's commonly used by keeping subjects in the center. And what's nice about this kind of photo, right, is that color also comes into play in attracting the attention of the viewer, the eyes of the viewer. So what I have done with this photo was to take a yellow flower on top of a green leaves. Yeah. So when there's a brighter color or a more saturated color, it actually directs attention. So the yellow is brighter than the green. So naturally, when you look at this photo, and it helps because it's already in focus. So your eyes is drawn towards this particular subject. And it's more pleasing because it's directly in the center of the frame. Okay, so this one is a very funny photo because I took this like many years back, and I only just realized that this is the NL building, like when I was like doing these slides. Yeah. So like I mentioned just now, symmetry. So this one is top down, is a symmetry because there's a mirror. This is the water. And then on the left and right side, you see the buildings creating this like frame. Okay, so this is also symmetry. And then another thing like I mentioned about the color is brightness. So when you have something that is bright inside the photo and then the rest is all shadows, your eyes is naturally drawn to the brighter object. So for this particular photo, the sky draws your attention towards the NL building. Yeah. Okay, so like I mentioned about the frame, right? Next one is frame within a frame. So it's a similar, it's like this photo is also considered a frame within a frame. Yeah, so for this is the use of the base objects or the environment in the scene to frame or contain the subject of interest. So you can see this particular photo, I've used the trees to contain the statue in the clouds, in the sky. Yeah, in the center of the frame. So it directs attention to the subject using natural or architecture objects. Okay, next I'll talk about natural light. So natural light is your best friend. It's always a good habit to take photos with an appropriate amount of light to ensure that your photos are clean and free of noise. Okay, so noise is caused by a sensor's increased sensitivity to light, and it makes the details of a photo very fuzzy. You can see noise in this particular photo. So there's all these little like grains and specks of dust this kind of like distorted colors, right? It's called noise. Okay, so to reduce this, right, you actually need to have to do a proper exposure so that there's no such noise. Okay, so always try to take photos when you have sufficient light. If you are taking photos of your friends or family at night, try not to use the camera's built-in flash. Okay, let me just show a quick example. So if you use a flash, right, and then you shine to the person's face like this, it's very unnatural. Like it just gives one flat brightness without any shadows around the sides. So, but if you were to go and use, say, another phone, another your friend or family's phone, and then you shine it from the side, like instead of frontal with your own camera, you shine it from the side, it looks more natural and more pleasing. So this is pretty much how we recommend to take photos and using your mobile phones. Okay, and you should also try to use a tripod if you have one. Okay, so this will result in a more natural and sharp and clean photo. Okay, so next is white balance. So white balance is the process of removing color cast, usually blue or tungsten, which is orange, so that it looks more natural. So we want to remove this, like eliminate this overlay of blue or orange so that it looks very natural. Yeah. So sometimes you may notice when you go out and then you take like some photos, maybe of a cafe, and then you find that your photo is very orange. There's actually a way to fix it in your own mobile phones. Usually they have it in the photo editor built into the phone itself. So you can fix it from there. Yeah. At the end of the session, I'll also introduce some of the popular photo editing apps that's simple to use and free to use later at the end of the session. Okay, so white balance is exceptionally important when you are working with multiple cameras, especially for video shoots. Yeah, so you want to have your cameras on the same white balance so that when you edit it at a later time, it's already, it's easy to manage. Yeah, when you do the editing. So it's best to do a proper white balance before you capture your photo or video, especially if it's for professional use. Okay, so now we are done with the basics. Okay, before we move on to the slightly more intermediate stuff, this one it's mainly it mainly applies to cameras like DSLRs, mirrorless cameras. But some of the things that I'll be talking about, right, it can also be found in the more in the pro settings of the newer mobile phones. Okay, so the first thing is focal length. The very technical description for this is it's the distance between the lens and a camera sensor or a film, those film roll that's in the older cameras. Yeah, so it's the distance between the lens and the camera sensor or film. Okay, so but what it basically does, right, is to tell us how much of the scene is captured, how zoomed in or zoomed out, like zoomed in or zoomed out the scene is in the camera. Okay, so the shorter the length, the larger the field of view. And then the longer the length, longer the focal length, the smaller the view. So this is basically like, physics, the refraction of light. So that when the lens moves away from it, then it's more zoomed out. And then when it moves further away, it's more zoomed in, and closer it's zoomed out. Okay. So as you can see here, the shorter length is zoomed out, 18 mm is zoomed out. And then as the number increases, the length increases, we get more zoomed in. So at 300 mm, you can see the house very clearly, like compared to 18 mm. For 18 mm is over here. And then for the 300 mm is just, you can see everything in a very clear view. Yeah. So here are some commonly used focal lengths in photography and videography. 18 mm and 24 mm is usually used for landscape, architecture, and interior design. Especially for interior design, like they want to make the house, the room look bigger. So they will use the 18 mm to make the walls like stretched so that everything looks like very spacious. Like actually, in fact, when you go there and then you see, hey, how come so small? So basically they use a wider lens. Okay. Then 35 mm and 50 mm is usually used for portrait and product photography. And 85 mm and above is usually used for sports and nature photography. So usually 35 mm and 50 mm, they are used for portrait and product photography because they are very close to the focal length of our own eyes. Yeah, and it pretty much determines what looks normal to us and what's not. Okay, so like you see, you can see over here, this 15 mm, it looks very weird to us because the person's face is very distorted, very stretched out and warped. So usually, like when you use your phone cameras, it's better to take from a further distance instead of a very close shot. Yeah, like especially when you take like selfie. Yeah, don't hold the camera too near. You should hold it at least like 1 arm length, stretch your arm all the way, and then you take the photo. At least your face will look slimmer compared to stretched. Yeah. So you can see over here 50 mm. It looks very natural. 85 mm is still okay to use, but the person's face would have lesser depth. Like you can see the face is more defined in this version compared to this. Yeah, it will look flatter. Okay, so next is aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Okay, so these are the three things that can be found in regular cameras as well as the pro mode of newer mobile phones. So these three affect a photo's brightness. The brightness is also known as exposure. So aperture and shutter speed determines how much light is captured. And then ISO determines how sensitive a sensor is or film is to light. Yeah. Okay. So for aperture, aperture controls the amount of light that is coming through a lens iris. So this is a lens and this is the iris. So all these little these blades, right? These blades of the iris will actually close and open depending on your camera setting. Yeah. So when it's open, right, at 1.4 f-stop 1.4 is a larger aperture. There's more light coming in, so it introduces a smaller depth of field, and then it's brighter because there's more light. So what depth of field is, right? It refers to how much of an area will be sharp when you focus your lens. Yeah, so when you see over here, there's a shallow depth of field, right? The cat is in focus and then the tree is out of focus. But as it goes down to f22, because the iris is very small now, there's lesser light coming through, the image is darker. And then the depth of field actually increases. And then you can see the cat and tree both in focus. Yeah, so this is how the lenses work, how aperture work. Okay, so next is shutter speed. Shutter speed determines how short or long a sensor of film is exposed to light. So for fast shutter speeds, it results in a sharper but darker image because the sensor of film, right, is exposed to a light for a very, very short amount of time. It's just like our eyes, we just capture once and then it opens and closes very fast. Yeah, but so this results in a very sharp image like this, fast shutter speed. So especially for a moving object, right? That's how you how they capture like sports photography and like F1. The cars are very fast, but because of the fast shutter speed, you are able to capture the car as though they are not moving at all. Yeah. So for slower shutter speed, right? Because there's a motion and the shutter is actually open for a longer amount of time, the image is brighter. But because it's open for a long amount of time, all the information about the movement, right, actually gets captured. So this results in motion blur. Yeah. So this is also the reason why when you take photos at night, like say of your family and friends, or you take the scenery, and then you notice that the photo is blurred. That's because there's not enough light, and then your camera is compensating it with the shutter speed. So if when you hold the camera and then your hand just tilt a bit, right, you will notice that there's a blur in the photo. Yeah, so for photography at night, it's always recommended to use a tripod if you can, or take a photo that has more light, yeah, in the surroundings. Okay, so next is ISO. Okay, so ISO determines how sensitive a sensor of film is to light. So the more sensitive it is, the brighter the photo will be. But it comes at a cost, which we mentioned earlier. It introduces noise. So these are noise, all these little specks of distorted colors. Yeah. So it's like I mentioned just now, if you're taking photos at night in the evening, it's better to use a tripod. So when you use a tripod, you can have a longer shutter speed, like a slower shutter speed to give yourself more light, like exposure, because your sensor is open to light, exposed to light for a longer amount of time. So you use a tripod, put it on a use your camera and put it on a tripod and take a slower shutter speed for night shot. Then you will result in a much cleaner photo. Yeah. Okay, so in order to take a properly exposed photo or video, it's important to keep these three things in balance because all of them affect exposure. So like I mentioned, put the camera on a tripod and then you take a slower shutter speed, and then your ISO is able to drop. You don't need to use a high ISO like 3200, and which is very sensitive and creates noise. You can use the ISO 100 and then use a slower shutter speed. Yeah, then aperture also helps because when you have a small aperture, then you have more light coming in. Yeah. So when you take a photo that is underexposed or overexposed, like too dark or too bright, right? The details in the shadows or highlights will not be captured. So it's always a good thing to take photos that are properly exposed. Okay, and you can't get all these details back, especially if you take in a standard image format like .jpg. Yeah, but if you shoot in RAW, like the RAW format, the entire camera's data is captured when you take the photo. So this is available to all semi-pro and pro cameras, and even some of the latest mobile phones, like the Galaxy, Samsung Galaxy S20 series. It also, or the Note 20, it also has the RAW processing format. Okay, so it allows the people to control the exposure of the photo in much more detail after it is taken, and retains all the shadows and highlights information that is usually lost in a JPEG file. Okay, so like you can see here, the sun is properly exposed, like the sunset is properly exposed, but you lost all the details here in the cliff. Like all the shadows just become one black chunk of data. So in a JPEG, you cannot get all these details back. Even if you boost your brightness, it just becomes gray color. You don't get all this kind of detail. So when you shoot in RAW, you are able to pull back all these details inside the photo processing applications like Lightroom and Capture One. Yeah. However, for RAW format, right, it comes, you have all these detail, but then it comes at a cost. So you will have to deal with a larger file size. So it's commonly, recommended only if you are into photography for the professional use, or if you need to do like professional editing, like say you want to like post a very nice photo on Instagram or something. Yeah. So if you take a photo of your environment like this, you rather have this kind of photo instead of this JPEG files. Yeah. Okay. So onto the free mobile apps to edit photos. Okay, so today I'll introduce to you VSCO, Snapseed, Lightroom, and Photoshop. So the difficulty increases for each of these apps. So VSCO is the simplest, Snapseed is slightly harder, Lightroom is harder, and then Photoshop is the most difficult. So if you want to use just, like you want to play with some filters and then do very minor, simple adjustments to your photo, VSCO is recommended. It's very beginner friendly. And then Snapseed is able to do what VSCO is able to do as well. And then it has more features and more control over the adjustments you can make to your photo. And then Lightroom is what Snapseed is able to do, and then it has even more features and gives you even more control. So yeah, as you have more control, the difficulty increases now. So especially for Photoshop, there's a larger learning curve. But if you are into like photography, I would suggest playing around with all these. Yeah. So Photoshop, you can use it for removing noise, pimples and wrinkles. Yeah. There's actually those like it's called a healing brush where you can go in to the app and then open the photo and then just draw onto the parts that you want to remove. Yeah. So there are built-in guides and tutorials in each of these apps. So if you're into it, go ahead and download and play them. They are all free. Yeah. When you export, there's also no watermarks. Yeah. So that's the good thing about these apps. Okay. So now I'll just show my own mobile photography, some of my photos. Okay, so this one, like earlier I mentioned, this was the NL building. It's taken at Suntec City. Yeah. Then this one was, I think, was at Mandai. Then you can see like symmetry used in this photo, and all these are taken with my own mobile phone. And if I'm not wrong, it was an iPhone 5. Yeah. So then this is, I believe it's in Taiwan. Yeah, then these were taken from a high-rise building, and then this one is kind of like leading lines as well, but it's the opposite of leading towards the frame. This is leading like towards the viewer instead. Yeah, and then this is an aerial shot. Then you see the shadow here. The shadow, this is on the rule of thirds. And then for this photo, it's at Vivo City. Then this kind of blur effect, right? You can actually use like applications like Snapseed and Lightroom. It's just a filter, a blur filter that you can apply onto your photo and create this kind of effect. Yeah. And then this was taken in Japan. Yeah. So you can actually take all these kind of photos with just your mobile phones. Yeah. Okay, Morphy asked what are some guiding principles as to when to use black and white effectively. Basically for myself, when I like taking black and white photos, but what I do with it, right, is I take photos as per normal. So I capture the entire scene, I have the proper composition, and then properly exposed. I take them in color. Then in apps like Snapseed or Lightroom, Photoshop, I'll just change it to black and white. And then one thing to note for black and white photos is to have contrast, and also to have you have to make sure that your whites, your highlights and shadows does not clip. Like you see my photo over here, there's no like parts that are totally like full on black and full on like white. So they are not overexposed or underexposed. It's just nice. So that's the nice part about black and white, is to create that very classy and contrasty look. Yeah. Okay, then someone asked, any tips for selfies? For myself, I don't really take selfies much, but like I mentioned earlier, like because our phones, the cameras, it needs to have a wide angle lens to capture your whole, your whole body, like from the chest up. So it's better to hold it further away from you, hold your mobile phone further away from you, and then capture the photo instead of holding it up close. If you hold it up close, your face will look more distorted and stretched out. So in that case, for people who are like chubbier, they will look rounder. So that's not really the look you would want. Yeah. So I would recommend just stretching your hand out. Okay, next question is by Mindy. She asked, what sort of lens would be best to take photos of pets? So for photos of pets, it's basically like portrait photography. Yeah. So 35mm to 50mm is will be highly recommended. But especially if your pet is very active, like run around here and there, and then you probably need a higher shutter speed. Yeah. So that's in the case of shutter speed instead of lens. Someone asked, was the subject the shadow for that photo? How do you decide the temperature and exposure you prefer? Yeah, for this particular photo, yes, the shadow was my subject. Even though I said that the brighter spots capture your eye, yeah, it's kind of true in that sense. So whatever is in I just felt that the shadow was pretty intriguing at the point of time when I took that photo. So yeah, but the opposite of the other part of the rule of third, right, which is on the left side, it also captures the attention. So it works in both ways. Yeah. So also one thing about photography is very subjective. So what I find is nice might not be nice to other people as well. So there's things like critics and stuff, but like don't take things too hard, I would say. Like for anyone who are interested in like doing photography more professionally. Zainab asked, people talk about the one third method. Are you referring to the rule of thirds? So for rule of thirds is basically placing, it's all these rules, right, or rather guides, right? It's how people who experimented with photography realize that how human eyes find things more pleasant, like what kind of photos people find more pleasant. So this rule of thirds is actually something that people came up with, and then realized that, hey, if we put things like put our subjects on these lines, it looks more pleasing to the eye. So yeah, so basically you just need to put your subject onto these grid lines, and then it becomes more pleasing to the eye already. Yeah. Okay. How about taking photos indoor? Okay, indoor photos for pets, right? So normally indoors, it's very dark. Like we don't have much sunlight, so it's better to take photos with lenses that have a smaller aperture. Let me just, yeah. You would want a wider aperture like f1.4, but usually f1.4 creates too much a too small depth of field. So your focus will be you really need to be on point. Otherwise, normally we'll use f2.8. So for indoors, use a smaller aperture number, f-stop, smaller f-stop, and then you will have more light. Then your image will become brighter. Then in that case, when it's brighter, you can have a higher shutter speed. Yeah. So all these things are related to each other. The aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. So you have for indoor shots of anything, especially not just pets, anything at all, you need to have a proper balance for your exposure.
Hello. For normal phones, will I be able to sort of like blur the image of the subject, like for example, like what is being shown right now?
Yeah, so for this kind of photos, right, normally it's using like DSLRs or mirrorless cameras. But the more newer mobile phones, they are much better now. So they have the capability to take this kind of photos either through AI, like digital rendering, or through like physical lens itself. So the newer phones are much better now and can do this kind of things, but the older phones cannot. Yeah.
Actually, my most concern is that the pictures that I'm referring to is pictures of participants in class. I'm trying to make it interesting, but the thing is sometimes it's very difficult to make it interesting if I'm just taking them from behind or.
I guess it's a common issue for mobile photography. Like everything is in focus. Yeah, but the newer mobile phones are able to do it. Like especially for portrait photography, like iPhone has a portrait mode which allows the software to actually cut out the person's body and then blur the background. Yeah. For Samsung, it's more natural. Yeah, so you can consider those, I guess. Yeah. So moving on to the next question. Cindy asked, can you recommend some DSLR cameras that take good photos and videos? Okay, basically, every DSLR camera is good enough. It's only a matter of whether you know how to use it and the extent of the use. So if you are very professional, you might want to go for, and it depends on how you like the look of the camera itself. So for myself, I like to have full frame cameras which create a very 35mm kind of look. And then those cameras are more expensive. Yeah, but the lower ends one are at least $1,000+. I can't tell you the models because I don't really know the lower end models. But for the higher ones, currently PixelStudio is using the Sony A7 III. There's A7S3 for videos, and then A7R3 for photos. So there's different users for both different cameras for both photo and video. Yeah. For us, we use video more often, so we will lean towards the A7S3 or A7 III. Shamin asked, what would you recommend for taking action shots in dim light? Wow. Recommend yeah, so for in dim light, if you really don't have a choice, like your surroundings don't have enough light, then use more like your cameras or your phone's flashlight. So use it as additional light source. And then for your lens itself, try to get one that has a larger aperture iris. Yeah, so that you can allow for more light to come in. For action shots, you also need to have like a higher shutter speed. So action shots best to have more light lah. Basically, you need more light.
I guess the issue is that sometimes when we try to take photos inside a room, for example, within the library, there's not a lot of light in the place where the patron or the action is taking place. So then it becomes a bit difficult. And then if you turn on flash, then it looks very sort of garish and a bit awful.
Yeah.
So there's no way to compensate. Just try, is it?
It really depends. If you use a mobile phone, it's most likely you can't really do anything about it. But if you use a DSLR, then yeah, you will have more control.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
you
right.
open your shutter bigger and stuff like that. You allow more light to come in.
If you're using a mobile phone, the flashlight, right? Don't use it through the camera itself. Like use a separate phone and then like shine it from the side.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next question is JY Chen asks, it seems to the regular person that mobile phone cameras are very good. Would you still recommend actual cameras if you take photos for documentation and work? Depends. Yeah, so like for like NLB events, sometimes we need to have a wide shot, like a very wide angle of the whole entire location. Then like you show that there's a lot of people and stuff like that. So in that case, mobile phones is okay because you would want everything to be in focus. You want to show all the people around, you want to show the stage, the exhibitions, all that kind of stuff. But if you are to take like a closer shot of the exhibits or the speakers, then in that case, a DSLR would be better, would be more recommended.
Yeah, because sometimes you cannot zoom in, you cannot have the wide angle. That's why DSLR gives you the, flexibility of changing lenses, use different lens, different settings. That's the benefit of using DSLR, because there's a lot of different use cases, different requirements when you go out for an event. For example, for us, when we go out covering an event, sometimes we use minimum we use 2 cameras, even though we record videos. One is and each of them have different lenses lah. So if I cannot capture a wide angle, then okay, I got somebody to cover this. So if I need to zoom, then I use this camera. And sometimes we bring like 2 or 3 other lenses to to swap just in case. Sometimes after the event ended, we have a doorstop or interview, so we need to use an interview lens, so-called, to fix on the camera. So there's different usage, and not all mobile phone cameras has this flexibility. Yeah.
Then for DSLRs, you are able to control your exposure better compared to mobile phones. And mobile phones, only the newer ones are able to do like telephoto without sacrificing the pixels. It won't crop in, it won't digitally crop in and zoom in until you see everything is all blurred. Yeah. So for DSLRs, you are actually moving the lens itself, the glass, to zoom. So it's much cleaner that way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Next person asks, for RAW format, if not JPG, what other formats would be a better alternative? Okay, for photography, usually it's either a RAW format or JPG. Like other formats is usually when you do photo processing, then you get you can change the file format. So when we go into Lightroom, we can change files from JPG or RAW to PNG files. PNG files are actually better than JPG files, but they are not available within a camera itself. Yeah. But if you take a JPG file and then you convert it to PNG file, it doesn't increase the quality. It just retains the JPG quality. Yeah. Even though you change the file format, it doesn't work that way. So if you want a higher quality one, I would say to just take raw photos, then convert it down to PNG. Yeah. Or JPG.
Yeah. Or TIFF lah. But it depends on what you use it for lah. Because sometimes when you use DSLR and take a photo, sometimes certain format requires, certain platforms require different types of file formats. For example, JPG is usually you're going to use it and you're going to publish it online and stuff like that. The file is smaller and stuff like that. But if you want to go for print, usually the printers will ask for TIFF file format lah. target image file formats rather than the joint pictures expert group. So there's a different uses, and also depends on your camera. Some cameras can only give you JPG and RAW, nothing else. Yeah,
Most
so it
cameras.
depends. Yeah,
Yeah,
most of the time is JPG. Yeah, JPG is smaller lah. Yeah. So if like you want to use it for like to publish online and stuff like that, yeah, JPG is fine. Yeah, then max it out, But for RAW, you want to reprocess it to like A0 size printing or banner printing, just use RAW lah. Yeah, it's big enough. Yeah, but the file is like 4, 5, 10 times bigger than JPEG.
Yeah, raw files are very big.
Yeah.
Okay, so Priscilla, any tips for taking flat lays without shadows?
So for flat lay shots, I think that if you want to execute it, right, I think there needs to be some planning involved lah, before you execute all these kind of things.
Yeah.
And those are like more like concept kind of photos, it's like rather very clean product photos. Without, if you want it without shadows.
So in order to combat this problem, you need to put in more light to counter the shadows lah.
And usually, if you can shift your desk or somewhere else, this will help as well.
Morphy asks, can you share with us some visual examples, your thinking process considerations, or just some tips to how to frame a photo well? Yeah, often I find it difficult to decide or even what to look for.
All this is considered like design work as well. So creativity is like subjective. So it's up to you how you want to you frame your subject and what looks nice. It comes with experience. You need to shoot more, and sometimes the way you hold your camera when you snap, make sure your hand doesn't move, and before you snap, you must take a deep breath, like, that helps lah. So all this comes with your experience lah. You go around and take around, then read up on some of these considerations. Sometimes they have like YouTube videos and training videos and stuff like that. So really it's up to you on what do you want. But the basics all here lah. The different shot sizes, and you follow the symmetry rule, you follow the rule of third, you follow the leading lines. This will guide you somewhere.
For me, I want to tell a story, because I want to share some of these pictures with people back home or some friends and things like that. And the only way they can see is through that picture. So in a way that it's like a story lah. Like, what do you want to tell? What do you see in that? What do you see in that scene? And are there any points of interest? What's around? And things like that lah. So maybe I just share with you like one picture that I took lah.
Okay, maybe in the meantime, I just share for me what I do, like what my thinking process is. Like for myself personally, I like to look at things and then I see, hey, it looks very, very nice. But how do I frame it? How do I, like compose the photo? So for me, I would really just think about the different composition techniques that I know and then introduce it into the photo. And from there, I will see, hey, in this particular photo, should I like remove this building? Should I like crop in some more, zoom in some more? Or should I position these leading lines on the left side instead of the center? So to me, it's like, I will take a few photos and then I'll see at a later time what's nice, what's not nice. And from there you experience and then you learn what's nice and what's not nice. And then you find your own style as well.
So I have so I can share the screen now. Maybe I share like the picture.
Yes.
So this one is a picture of the sunset in Langkawi lah. So for me, right, because the sunset is the feature of this entire thing. So what is the brightest thing in this picture? The sun. So that's why like I wanted to like frame it in such a way that the focus is on the sun, I guess. So you can see all the nice lighting and things like that, and then also the water, the horizon is like more or less in the middle, so everything is like kind of like symmetry and things like that. Again, like what Rayen said earlier on. So like I said, in that situation, like you really need to think about what kind of story that you want to tell others lah. Then if you have that in mind, then you can like slowly make your way, or like think of the processes that you need to get to attain that result that you want lah. If that helps. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. The story part really helps very much. Thank you.
Okay. No, welcome.
Okay, so next question, Marina Zainal asks, what type of camera would you recommend for newbies? Your phones. Yeah. So your phones is good enough for basically like landscape photos, your architectural photos, like places of interest, all that kind of thing is okay. For like you want a more personal kind of look, like portrait photos, you want it to have usually you will want it to have like a motion, not motion blur, a depth of field, so the behind is all blur. Then it will look much cleaner. Then your focus is really on uh, the subject one. So in that case, right, semi-professional photo cameras are better. Yeah, but otherwise your phones are usually good enough. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
And when you're in your phones, you use use the manual function if if there's some available just change the ISO, change the f stop and stuff like that. Then you'll know what these functions are for lah. Some phones have that functions already, so fiddle with it.
But I would say if you want to start like going into photography more professionally, then probably start with a semi-pro camera. Yeah, they are usually much cheaper than the professional cameras, usually around 1,000 plus or slightly lower than $1,000. Yeah, so those are good enough to get you started into photography using DSLRs. Yeah. So the next question is, would you recommend the use of lenses that you can attach to your phone? Yes and no, depend on your use case also. So if you want to create a very creative, funky photo with your friends or the environment, then yes. But if you are using like to take like a group photo, then you probably don't want to use a fisheye lens because it would make your subjects all very stretched and distorted. So yes and no. Depend on your use case. Okay, then the next one is how to take better food photos. Okay, so food photos is also technically product photography. So I would say use 35mm or 50mm. Then for food photography, you will need nice lighting that casts a soft shadow onto your food so that it looks smoother, more appetizing. And then there's also other things that come into play like water, and there's all those kind of like funky science stuff. Like they use glue to replace like cheese or whatever, those white color. It's like artificial food to replicate the effect of actual food. Yeah. So this is more of a different topic. But in terms of camera wise and lens wise, use a 35mm or 50mm. Next question is, how do we know when it is better to shoot portrait or landscape? I would say just try to take both. Yeah. So when you take both, you will see like why portrait looks nicer and why the landscape looks nicer. So sometimes you have subjects like say in rule of thirds position. Sometimes in landscape you can see more horizontally. So if there's nice subjects on those lines, then landscape is better. And the same thing goes for portrait. So if you can just take both, then you see which is better after you have taken it. Yeah. So next question is the joints in the lines better than just the lines? Oh, I guess you refer to rule of thirds, right? So for rule of thirds, it actually doesn't really matter. As long as they are sitting on the lines or on the joints, the crossing parts, right? It's fine. It's usually quite subjective as well. So like I mentioned, photography is very subjective. So people normally don't really go and identify and see whether is it really sitting on the line or not, or that kind of thing. So as long as it's close to the line, it's fine. Okay, so next one, please share tips of taking photos of objects like a rare book. So for rare book, maybe I would say like normally how you take product photography for books is the book standing up. So you have proper lighting on the book cover, then maybe a highlight light behind it. Yeah. So and then definitely you will need things like background objects, and then a small depth of field, a shallow depth of field, so that your book is in focus and then the background is blurred. Then you can have like a plant or anything to make it look more interesting rather than just a book on a table. Yeah. Like you want to have photos that goes onto Instagram, you need to create something that's more modern. So you can have like color paper or whatever thing like as a background. Then you stand the book, like make it standing, and then you take a photo. So it becomes like product photography instead of a just a top-down view, which might be very boring. But because that really depends on the use that you are going for, the use case that you're going for. So one is for like showing your team, or the other one is more on promoting it online. So there's two different use cases, which you need to have two different kinds of photos. Any tips on taking photo in a Dean Cafe? So like I mentioned earlier, it's just you need to have a lower, a larger aperture lens, like f-stop 1.4. Then if you can, use additional light sources. Okay, someone asked what model of camera would you suggest for someone who wants to begin photography but needs to get familiarized with the basics? Okay, so like I mentioned earlier to another person, is use your mobile phone is enough. Just that it really depends on how much you want to get into photography with. So if you are just starting photography and you must have a DSLR or mirrorless camera, then I would say start with a semi-pro DSLR. I can't give you the model, but just go for a semi-pro one. When you go to Canon and Sony, they usually have different categories like professional, semi-pro. Yeah, go for the semi-pro ones. The professional ones are very expensive, and you shouldn't. I don't think it's advised to go for such expensive cameras unless you have a lot of money. So on the mobile phone camera, are there any scenarios in which using flash is actually helpful?
Yes.
At night.
Yes.
Yeah, at night. So when you're taking photos of your friends and family at night, just use additional phone to cast light instead of using the phone directly and cast light.
Yeah, here's a personal tip. Like one location where you definitely need to use a light jewel, the waterfall. Because usually when you go there, then you see people trying to take picture of them with the water or whatever it's called, right? But it turns out very dark. What you can do is that same trick, like you just use an external like flashlight, and then you just point it towards yourself or have another person pointing at you. It will look so much better. So the result is that you can see both the features of the waterfall and yourself like equally lit or more or less. So it's more satisfying to the eye.
Okay, so
next.
Okay, next question. What about the HDR? Okay, so HDR is a high dynamic range. So it's definitely recommended when you are going to shoot like landscape photos. Like you have your shot has the sky and then like a building or like mountain or whatever. If there's a lot of contrast in the actual location itself, you would want to use HDR to retain all the details. If you don't have HDR, then it's probably like a JPEG image. So you, as in it is a JPEG image, but you will have the same effect as like just now the example. So everything is too bright or either too dark. Yeah. So HDR would help balance things out better. So for landscape photos, always use HDR.
What lens would you recommend for travel if you could bring only one out? Personally, for me, 95% of the time now when I go overseas and take pictures, I just use my phone. Honestly speaking. Because right now phones today are insane. Like they have like zoom in one, they have like 3 lenses. You can have like normal lens, you can have like ultra wide angle lens, you can have like it goes even like zoom in like you wouldn't believe. So in a way, phones nowadays are all that you need. But if you ask me, right, for DSLR, I personally use zoom that is 28 to 300 mm.
So are any current smartphones on par? Not yet. But
coming soon now, maybe.
Yeah, but it's still a much like the current year, the new phones, right? The new iPhones, the new Samsung phones, they are much better than the past. Yeah, it's like in terms of low light capability and in terms of the depth of field capability. Yeah.
Let me show you real quick about a photo that I use using my phone, which is a previous, which is a Note 9 . Yes, this is it. Nice. This was taken in Japan, and yeah, this you not using a DSLR, it's just with the phone, so you can achieve this kind of results . So it's all about practice. If you really.
Okay, next question is, what is your take on micro four thirds versus DSLR cameras? Micro four thirds actually gives you like there's pretty much like no depth of field to DSLR cameras because the sensor size is smaller, lesser light goes in, so the depth of field is pretty much like non-existent. So for me personally, I like to have depth of field, especially very shallow ones. I just like it. It looks very clean and like sleek to me.
Very pro
Yeah.
looking.
So for me, I would say DSLR is better in that sense.
Yeah, and some nowadays like DSLR also getting like smaller and smaller, almost like micro four thirds size as well.
Yeah, but the sensor size still remains.
Yeah, sensor size is big for DSLR. Go for the bigger sensor size. You capture more. You can capture more.
Yeah, and your photos will naturally become brighter. So in that sense, you will have lesser noise as well. How to take photo that show contrast in size of the objects.
So I just want to know if, let's say I'm like want to take something that's small, and then they want to show it's small. Sometimes when you don't have the experience to take the photo, and then it turns out you look at the thing, it turns out like it's not small when it's actually just yeah.
Oh, relative to the size lah, basically.
Yeah, correct.
Oh, then you play with the short size. You take it further. That's why. You need to get something to compare it with inside the photo. Sometimes you want to show that it's small. You take a coin. This is 20-cent coin. People know what the size of 20-cent coin. You put it beside that, But if it interferes with your composition, then there's no way for you to do it. So usually people do stuff like to compare lah. Yeah, so you take something, okay, 50 cents. 50 cents around this size, so you put it beside it, and people know the size of this. Yeah, which is good for some product photography. Yeah.
Or you find something that's way bigger than it lah.
People must know lah.
Another way is also to take from the higher angle instead of lower. Because if you take from lower, right, it looks like more giant, like more it looks larger. So take from a higher angle.
The majestic look follow. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome.
Welcome. Okay, last question. What kind of setup do you recommend for filming a flat lay video?
The quick answer is that you need a separate tripod, or rather a stand.
A rig, we call it a
rig with an arm extension so that you can mount your camera at the end of that, and then your camera will point straight down to it. But it needs to be very sturdy because otherwise, because you're working against gravity, so it can if you're not careful, then your whole setup, your camera can come crashing down.
We got one last question. It's by Cindy. She asks, is video taken on DSLR as good as semi-pro video cameras, or do you suggest a separate video camera? So quick answer is not lah. So there's different purposes to different cameras. So if video camera, definitely video camera will be better than the DSLR. So DSLRs, only the more professional ones have capability that's as good as a semi-pro video camera. So now in the modern like amateur videography, like all the short films and all that, people actually use DSLRs to shoot videos now because they can use it for multi-purposes. They can use like for photo, for video. Yeah. So it really depends on your use, how professional you need the video to be. Yeah. Hope that answers your question. For Sun Fan, he mentioned GH4. Yeah, I think GH4 is more of a in-between of both worlds also, so you can use for video and for photo, but I think it leans a bit more on the video side. Yeah, so for cameras like this, right, the megapixels is a lot lower, so your photos can't really be printed on a large billboard or advertisement. Yeah, so there's different purposes to these cameras. Okay, I think that's all.
I think that's all we have for today. So to end this session, stay home, stay safe, and take care. And PixelStudio signing out. Thank you for your attendance. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend, yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.